Welcome to the committee meeting.
Hello.
We've got a quorum. And again, could I just remind members about switching off mobile phones as they interfere with the sound recording system, and the meeting will be videoed. Could I remind members of their obligation to declare any relevant financial or other interests in relation to today's business, and also to turn the volume down on all tablet devices. The quickest way is function and F8. Next item, apologies. The clerk has received apology. No apologies as yet.
Just Mr. Cree will be slightly.
Mr. Cree will be slightly, correct. And brings us then to the draft minutes of the meeting of the 5th of February, which are at page 5 in your pack. And would members agree that this is an accurate record of the meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. The first presentation is from Belfast City Council on boxing strategy, and then subsequently we'll have briefings from DCAL and Sport NI. So, could I refer you to page 11, Clark's memo, a briefing paper from the Council at page 14, and a copy of the City Council's amateur boxing strategy at page 16. And welcome to the meeting, Rose Crozier, who's the Assistant Director of Parks and Leisure, and Claire Sullivan, the Policy and Business Development Officer. You're both welcome to the meeting. Thanks for coming, and I'd like to proceed and your opening statement.
Thank you, Chair. By way of context, first of all, the amateur boxing strategy for Belfast City Council was developed really to try and understand need in the first instance, what boxing clubs in the city were trying to achieve and how we could enable that. And also, alongside this, it was clear that there was other works underway through DCAL and Sport NI to look at facility needs. So we were very clear at the outset that we wanted to be complementary to the work that was going on through Sport NI, and we wanted to focus our strategy around, if you like, the softer side of delivering to boxing clubs in the city, and that was looking at building capacity, enabling them to deliver certain programmes in the city. We did establish a steering group that would have oversight of this strategy. The strategy was aimed at looking to the future, a 10-year outlook with an initial focus on the first 3 years. We got commitment of $200,000 a year, a budget to that, and we got an agreement in October 2012 to deliver this. We set up the steering group, as I mentioned, which was ourselves, myself who chairs it, and representation from Sport NI, Ulster Boxing Council, IABA and County Antrim Boxing Board. And really that steering group meets regularly on a monthly basis to look at the action plan and the delivery of that action plan and to deal with any issues arising. The action plans, as set out there on page 1, really were focusing under the sort of 4 strategic streams, which is aligned to the strategies emerging out of Ulster Boxing Council, and looking at pathways, looking at coach education and development, club support and development, and governance, and a series of actions within each of those headings. In terms of implementation, page 2 sort of sets out for you the summary of what we've actually achieved to date. And the first focus was in getting the right resource in place. So we appointed a sports development officer whose role and focus is around the delivery of the boxing strategy, and 2 boxing coaches. The sports development officer was appointed in December 2013, and then the coaches thereafter in April 2014. So it was really at that point that we did actually really start to deliver on the ground and engage with the clubs and local communities. And you can see there under each of the workstream headings the actual work that has happened on the ground. In terms of pathways, we've been able to deliver a day of boxing in Belfast this year for the 2nd time, and seen quite a sort of an input in terms of the boxing clubs and the local community. We've seen a rise in participation in terms of the boxing clubs and the number of participants. This year 20 clubs were involved and 3,000 participants across the city in the day of boxing. In partnership and steered through the steering group with County Antrim, we've been able to deliver 10 events, 10 boxing events in the city, with an estimated 1,500 spectators. And those are targeted at a range of age groups and has involved participation, sort of an international aspect, and teams participating from Germany and Spain. The two community coaches are really about the grassroots side of this, and they're delivering programmes across a number of schools in the city, both primary and secondary. And we've worked with the Educational Library Board in terms of how we direct that. These are after schools clubs, which are they're non-contact sports, so it is about all of the principles and disciplines around boxing, but it's pointing children towards boxing clubs in their local community if there is an aptitude or an interest in boxing. But it's more about the discipline of boxing and keeping fit and being involved in the sport and good healthy exercise. As well, this is about building capacity in clubs. It's not just about us doing for them. This is enabling them to sustain themselves. So it's important for us to provide the right level of support to clubs so they are able to do for themselves, get access to their own funding. And so we have been able to help them get access to funding to deliver, for example, midnight boxing across the city. And that was during the summer of 2014, and it ran for 10 weeks. And this is a good example of how we've been targeting young people who might have been otherwise engaged to do more positive action, more positive healthy activity through boxing in the city. And we've provided funding for courses for referees and judges, and our two community-based coaches have run a series of programmes engaging or aimed at around 10,000 participants across the city. And so that is really directing people towards the sport of boxing that might not have had sight of that before. Coach education and development, we've run a number of courses, 7 courses supporting 100 coaches, and that's including first aid and IABA level 1 and level 2 course qualification. And we've supported IABA Club Development Manager, who's a regional appointment, run a series of courses around child protection in the city for Belfast clubs. In terms of club support and development, we're supporting the establishment of 4 new clubs in the city. We see that growth of boxing through clubs as important, and also perhaps looking at where we can create boxing clubs and point young people towards those boxing clubs in areas of the city that might not have had that, a boxing club available to them before. We have supported Upper Ormo Boxing Club, and they're actually now almost up and running. And Pitt Boxing Club at Montgomery Road, and it's kind of going through the procedures and getting themselves established. We've also engaged with 2 outside of our current boundary, but they're coming into us, and we've sort of ensured that we are looking to clubs who will be in the new Belfast area. And we've been working with St Michael's Boxing Club in Poleglass and Tullycarnet, so that when they do come into our new area, they will be fully funded and supported by us as a Belfast club. And we have supported clubs in the city through our support for sport funding, and that's enabling them to run their own events. And we're currently looking at a good relations programme and how we build on some of the good work that's going on across communities. We see good relations as being integral to everything that we do, but it's looking, I think, towards what IABA are doing in terms of them looking at their programme, what we can do to build on that, to sort of better facilitate good relations in the sport. In terms of governance, through our Sports Development Officer, we're providing ongoing support to clubs through the Club Mark scheme, and today we've supported 16 clubs achieving Club Mark. I mean, our steps going forward are really to build on some of the foundations that we've put in place. As we were only appointing our resources sort of late 2013, we've really only had 1 full year of proper operation under our belt. So it is now about looking towards evaluating what we have achieved and trying to inform how we then go forward, what other gaps might there be. We did baseline ourselves to understand the landscape before we came up with our action plan. We aim to baseline ourselves again, probably towards the end of 2016, so that we understand how far we've moved, what we actually have delivered in terms of our performance measures, and then inform a further plan and put a case together. We only have commitment at this point in time for 200,000 a year for 3 years. So it is about looking at the future sustainability of the sport and how we ensure that this goes forward in the future.
No. Okay, that's fine. William Humphrey, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, ladies, for your time and presentation. Can I just ask, Rose, in terms of the steering group, I note the people you have there. How are you able to make sure you've got a steering group? How are you able to make sure the strategy that the steering group's trying to put in place actually was delivered on the ground?
Governance-wise, this is a Belfast City Council strategy, so therefore it's agreed and input to through our committee and through council. And the steering group, I think it's important to understand the role of it. It is about, I suppose, advice and guidance about implementation. And we do look to those on the ground who are in boxing, really to make sure that we are in tune with what the needs are and that we are working across communities. That's one aspect of it, but also I think for us it's what we do with our coaches and our sports development officer, our officials, because I think that's where we have, I suppose, directed them to ensure that they are working in all of the schools that we can work in, both primary and secondary, and that is across the community. So it is, I suppose, from both those angles, doing what we do to meet need and understand what that need is in terms of what boxing clubs are actually trying to do on the ground. And we get that through that membership on the board.
Sorry, can I also just interrupt? Whenever we were developing the strategy, as part of it, we also consulted widely with all the boxing clubs in the city. So we actually did send out a questionnaire and worked with them all. And also we had regular meetings at key stages in development with the clubs, to which all clubs represented were invited. So that has also been an ongoing process as well in getting club level.
We still also have meetings with boxing clubs. Periodically we pull them together again. So it isn't just what the steering group are saying. Necessarily, it's what we are asking of the clubs, and it's ensuring that their understanding is there. I mean, providing the support for the midnight boxing is an example of that, where we did actually get all of the clubs together. I think we got the hit rate we got because their engagement was good. So we weren't depending just on a steering group and representation. We are working with clubs on the ground to actually deliver that.
I should have declared interest at the outset because I was on the council and I remember the Parks Committee whenever the boxing strategy was set up. In terms of the council has its boxing strategy, and so ratepayer money is being spent there. Then you have taxpayers' money through the decal strategy. As you know, and remember, Rose and I was there, I was conscious and keen that we can have two standalone strategies. It would make sense that they were joined up and they were meshed as far as is possible. From the council's perspective, has that happened, do you think?
I mean, as I said at the outset, we were always aware of that funding stream coming forward from DECAL and the work that Sport NI were doing, and there was, I think, a working together at a point to try and make sure that we complemented each other. There was a very clear line between what each of us were doing, and that Sport NI's focus was on facilities, understanding needs for facilities, and we were focusing on the softer side, the programming and capacity building. They did need to sort of ensure that we were both enabling the same outcomes. I think in terms of actual implementation, I think the Sport NI piece has gone off and done what it was aiming to do. There hasn't been, in terms of governance or oversight, a joined-up approach to that, although Sport and I are represented on our steering committee.
Yes,
but they were represented in our steering committee at the very start in terms of building the strategy and getting to the stage where the strategy was clear and understood what our action plans were. In terms of implementation, that hasn't happened.
Can I ask you, because I noticed that Sport NI are at the table with you, and obviously that's an arm's length body of the department.
Yeah.
I think it's regrettable that joined-upness wasn't achieved. I think I can ask you, is there direct, outside of the Sport NI reps that come to the strategy meetings, is there direct department discussions between the council and the department around these issues?
Boxing, no.
And finally then, capacity building. Can you give me some tangible outcomes and capacity building you were talking about across the city?
I mean, as I said, the Midnight Boxing is one example where we enabled clubs to apply. I mean, they applied for the funding. It wasn't council. So, I mean, and there was direct evidence of them actually achieving. It is about how we build their self-sustainability, and that they can do that, you know, in the future on their own without council, without the hand-holding. And it is about the likes of Clubmark, you know, actually establishing clubs that have all of the right wherewithal to continue on in the future. I mean, I think 16 clubs already have Clubmark. They have to build on that. But I think it is about making sure that, I don't think that there will ever be a stage where there isn't support in terms of, you know, like we have support for sport in the council, and we provide that to all clubs and all codes. I think there will always be an element of that to oil the wheels, but it's about whether or not they need such a focus in terms of direct support in the future is the question. We want to get to a point where they can do it themselves, and I think we're only 1 year in, and we've seen some evidence of them being able to, and they're not all the same. They're not, you know, some clubs have great capacity already, and some clubs, you know, are sort of at the very start of this. So it is about understanding how we direct our resource to help the ones that really need the capacity to be built, and get them all to that sort of same grade in terms of self-sustainability. Some clubs are really good at it. They can get access to funds, and that's great. But we want them all to be able to do that kind of thing. But it is also about you know, we haven't done this yet. This is our focus in this year ahead, about looking at volunteering and how we build a stronger volunteer network around boxing. What we've seen is in a lot of clubs, they're very dependent on 1 or 2 individuals. And if those 1 or 2 individuals, you know, are under pressure or fall for whatever reason, the club almost falls. So it isn't all about funding. It's about the network that we build around it, and make boxing open to that. I think boxing is quite closed in its community, and that's just, you know, just historical in terms of, you know, they're a tight group and they're, you know, the people involved. How we open all of that up and get them to get help from wherever they can get help. We've talked about a volunteering bank, and being able to tap into resource from that as and when you need it, and it's getting that to be acceptable in the boxing community, and getting good examples of how that can work, and building credibility around it and trust around it, so that it works in the future. That's one of our aspirations for the year ahead.
And Chair, I know that Rose in particular has put a lot of work into a boxing club in my area, and I would thank her for it. Thank you.
Before we go to the next person, could I just ask, you did a baseline study, and I know your focus is on what I'll describe as the softer side of it as opposed to the more physical side. But 2 things. Did the baseline study take any account or produce any information about the suitability, the state of the premises in which the clubs were meeting or operating from? And secondly, did it produce any information about geographical spread across the city?
If I can just answer that, I don't know if you actually have a copy of the boxing strategy at hand, but at the back of it there is a section which summarises a baseline assessment, and there was a section in that around catchment area. So you would actually see in terms of, I don't know if it was page 35 of the boxing strategy, so it actually gives you an idea of the clubs in terms of where their catchment came from. So that is one thing we looked at as clubs in terms of their membership. We also did ask questions on facilities and equipment, and that was at page 43. It was section 8 of the baseline assessment, and that actually, if you look through that at the time, asked them about ownership of the building. It also asked them around the types of facilities they had for things like, did they have female changing, female toilets, and it also asked some questions about equipment, and it broke down information on the type of equipment. There also was qualitative information around their facilities, and there was comments, and that's included within that section. So they did make some comments on the state of the actual facilities. And also at the end of the strategy, at Appendix 4, there is a map which demonstrates the spreads of clubs across the city. So that would have been page 51. And that actually breaks the boxing clubs. The first map broke them down against 2010 health deprivation, and the second map broke it down against 2010 multiple deprivation.
It's interesting when you look at the map to see there that there are certain areas, when you allow for the hills, which obviously there aren't any boxing clubs up there, there are certain areas in the city. So, for example, if you look there, parts of the north of the city and so on, parts of the east, there are quite significant areas where there's nothing at the moment. Strikes me looking at it, and a particular focus then towards, I suppose, parts of central Belfast, south west and so on. It's an interesting spread because there are clearly significant areas where there's no provision at the moment.
And we did recognise that we needed to look at, and that's why we put some budget around startups, as we called it, and looking at to try and get some clubs established where there traditionally haven't been clubs. And we have had a focus around the east of the city. So that's why you'll see in Upper Ormo, which isn't east, but and Tullycarnet, which is coming into us, we're actually seeing some interest there now. East Belfast is very well established, East Belfast Boxing Club, and they may even have capacity to create spin-off in their area. So it is about understanding where some of the success is in those areas who don't have the numbers of clubs, and how we build their capacity and build the interest in those areas. We're trying to do some of that interest growing through schools.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say, we do plan to repeat the baseline assessment in 2016, and Section 9 of the strategy actually outlines the monitoring and evaluation, the performance indicators. So some of that will be looking at the number of clubs and look at the number of volunteers and coaches. So that will be we can use that to identify in terms of growth across the city.
Oh, geez, I've got the names in the wrong order. Councillor Hoshin, then David.
Sure. Thanks, ladies, for the presentation there. You rightly touched on it, Rose, there when you were saying that many boxing clubs are down to 1 or 2 people who actually run them, and that's the nature of boxing.
Reality, yep.
And I suppose that limits the capacity to a certain extent. That being said, if I'm right here, there's 31 boxing clubs plus then the number of new boxing clubs, so we're talking about low 30s there, 16 of which have achieved the club mark, which is commendable in itself. Of the remainder, how many of those are progressing well towards that, and what would you hope of, say, perhaps in the coming year or 2 years?
I haven't got the numbers here in front of me, I'm sorry, but we have engaged with all of the clubs out there around club. It would be our aspiration to get them all to that level, because I think it's important in terms of just governance and how to run a club effectively that we do that. But you're right, it is sometimes as well about capacity, and these things need to go hand in hand. The volunteering piece, I think, needs to go hand in hand with that, so that we have a number of people able to pick up the baton in these clubs. The age. I've looked at the age profile as well, and what you'll find is that there's an issue in terms of some people are becoming of an age now where they're no longer able to sort of commit the time and effort to some of these clubs. So we need to look at sort of that future proofing of clubs, and that way I think volunteering will become more important, and getting younger people in the clubs who have shown some capacity in terms of leadership, getting them to a point as well where they can take up the baton and run clubs in the future. So some of it can be from within clubs as well. It's spotting the talent in clubs.
And see, in terms of a good relations programme, the implementation of it there coming. I know you mentioned the Midnight Boxing which I had heard some things about, but how well is that progressing, and how are you going to implement that good relations programme?
Well, I would say good relations is integral to boxing and boxing strategy throughout. It's not something that's bolted on at the end. I think our focus in terms of the good relations is what else do we need to do in tandem with. There is a programme of work coming forward from IABA around good relations, and we want to sort of understand what that is, the direction of that, and see how we both dovetail into that and complement it. So it is, I would say that we've had a cross-community and inclusive focus in everything that we do anyway. It's what else do we need to do in terms of where are the issues, well, how do we address them, what else do we need to do within that framework. Okay. So I'm saying it in the sense that we have an emerging action plan, which is to understand the IABA direction and to create our own action plan to complement that and build upon it.
Okay, thank you.
Jimmy Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentations. Very useful. And the papers you've produced as well. Just following on then from the likes of the Good Relations and the Midnight Box. How does that work? Is that the facility that the club has would be used for the midnight boxing, or would they go out into the community on evenings to do events in maybe other community facilities or street type?
It can be a bit of both. You know, some of what we're trying to do is to take boxing to where it normally isn't.
Yes, yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at.
So that could be in community centres or leisure centres, or you know, whatever venue, and it's about having portable rings that you can actually do that, and we have at least one portable ring. So it is a bit of both. The one that happened over the summer was more about clubs, but we're aiming to do it again, but trying to do it and stretching ourselves a bit to kind of take it to the less sort of obvious areas. Yeah, and it is, you know, it is sort of trying to align it to some of the stuff that we've been doing with schools about, you know, if you are really trying to create pathways to boxing and, you know, identify people who have an interest or a talent, an aptitude for it, then it is about, and it's linking in again to where the startups might start to emerge. It's how do these things all go together to really result in new clubs and more people involved in boxing that wouldn't have been before. So, and the Belfast Day of Boxing as well, it's all about trying to get a profile around boxing that wasn't there before.
Yes.
So that people see it as a very positive sport, and that it is about health. It's as much about diet, nutrition and discipline as it is about actually the competition. And so it is getting an understanding or a better awareness about boxing and what boxing can deliver, and targeting it at the areas that are hard to get at. And targeting it at sort of the areas that are hard to get as well. Women, young women,
that was my next question.
would be an area that we're trying to get at. But again, you know, this has to go hand in hand with the facilities side of things, because some of the barriers to young women being involved in boxing is the fact that some of the clubs don't have female changing, female toilets, etc. So, you know, there is a chicken and egg thing going on here. We need the facilities piece to kick in to enable some of the work that we're doing to really bear fruit. So it is how these things do complement each other. Yeah.
A young lady works for me as a boxer, and
Yep.
Don't think the facilities would put her off. Have you seen an increase in participation from the female side?
I think there's definitely an interest, and we're seeing it through schools. We have a male and a female coach, which has also helped as well, because I think the message from that is, you know, that females can do boxing and how it actually, you know, benefits in terms of, you know, their own health and well-being and their outlook. And so it's a very positive message, and we're definitely seeing that through schools.
I think that is something, as I say, we should be able to pick up when we do the baseline assessment, because that is actually one of our performance indicators, is about an increase in female participation. So I think potentially this time next year we'll be in a better position to answer some.
Thank you.
Okay. Rosie McCorney.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation. It's a credit, I think, to the Council, the way boxing has been taken forward and the good that it does. And I think it's also a credit to our own local boxers who have been very, very successful and probably coming out of very poor facilities, and they've achieved such success. But can you give me a wee sense of how much benefit there has been due to the Council input in your strategy? What is the increase in interest been like, and do you see that going on into the future? And what added benefits might there be as a result of that as well?
I think in the first instance the profile of boxing has changed. I can't quantify that except to say that, you know, there's a greater awareness both in terms of the Boxing Day, the events that we run. So it's more sort of accessible for local communities. The access to schools, I think, has also raised the profile in terms of creating pathways for young people, you know, male, female, all ages. I think those are some of the benefits. But we're just at the start of this in some ways. We haven't done the second baseline to see really what do the numbers now look like? Have we actually achieved what we set out to achieve, or do we need to do more, or do more of a certain thing? So I think that remains to be seen. I think we have created a platform which was needed in terms of how we build capacity. We still have lots of work to do around building that capacity, because it is about how clubs are able to more sustain themselves and have, you know, the capacity built from within them, but also have the ability to reach out for help and know where that help is to enable them to go forward. Once I think we are at a point, and we're not there yet, when we have that framework there, clubs will be in a much better place. You know, we have a case to make, you know, in the next year to 18 months about, you know, what now? That'll be built on the evaluation of our performance measures. And it also will be about, you know, how council supports us in the future. You know, because we got a commitment to a budget for 3 years. You know, what happens after that? You know, and whether, you know, clubs will be in a position to sustain themselves at that point, or have the ability to access funds and whatever at that point, is a question that we're going to have to answer. So I think, you know, it is incumbent upon us to be able to assess what real outcomes we've created here. Are there further gaps that we now need to direct attention to, and what the plan from sort of year 4 onwards actually is to deliver that, and what the funding might need to be to deliver that?
So you don't know what the funding...
No, I mean, we've got that commitment for 3 years. It's commitment in revenue. We need to reassess our position and obviously bring recommendations forward based on our performance and where we understand need then to be, so that we're directing the actions thereafter to improve further what we do. But we're seeing a difference in terms of, as I said, the profile of boxing. Clubs are certainly far more engaged in terms of understanding what this is going to deliver to them. You know, because typically, and I'm sure you all know, clubs have struggled, and it's even, you know, what might seem like minor things like paying, you know, affiliation fees, something like £500 a year. That is a big thing to be asking a club to do, and they still do. They do it themselves, but it's how they get all of the other things right in terms of their governance, getting the help from the right places to be able to apply for funding. And things that they maybe didn't do before because there were barriers there. You know, it may have been as simple as not being able to fill in forms or not knowing where to get access to something. So that kind of support is really, I think, invaluable to clubs, because it's getting them off the ground and enabling them to do some of the really basic things, but they're important things that actually will help them, I think, in the future. And, you know, I think develop their own confidence as well about their ability to do.
Just one final question. On the map, I mean, it's clear that you're hitting all the areas with multiple deprivations. So, I mean, that's very positive. And Claire pointed out that there's gaps. Why do you think those gaps exist? You know, some areas don't seem to have clubs, and some have a lot of clubs.
It may just be traditional that there weren't clubs, that boxing wasn't a thing in that area. I mean, I can't really comment because I don't know. That's just where they happen to be as and when we did that baseline. But it's given us, you know, I suppose, areas to target to see, is there interest in those areas? And we're finding that out through schools. And where there's demand being created, you know, we will look then to see whether there's opportunity to create clubs, you know, through other clubs. Thank you.
Thank you. Oliver McMullen.
Chair, thank you. I congratulate you on an excellent report. Has anything arisen that has surprised you in this so far? When we look back in the past and some of the divisive things that were put up to my mind, to try and divide boxing, boxing rallied to this here.
I think from the outset, what has really bolstered me and sort of, you know, made us want to do some of this is the absolute passion and commitment of the people involved in boxing. They are absolutely committed to what they're doing. You know, some clubs, I would even say, have survived through individuals putting their hands in their own pockets. You know, there is a real passion and commitment to young people, and that is evident in every boxing club I've come across. And I think that's a real a real motivator. It certainly was a motivator for me in terms of what we were trying to achieve. I wouldn't say that surprised me. Not having been involved with boxing or had anything to do with boxing, I suppose that was an eye-opener for me in terms of the overall commitment.
Yeah, that's surprising.
Yeah, a real commitment and passion for the sport.
What about decal? How have they played a role in this?
Well, I mean, I've only really been involved with Sport NI in terms of understanding how the facilities and capital schemes were going to be ruled. My engagement has been, I mean, we've shared information with each other, and I mean, I think that is going to meet a real need. I mean, one will complement the other, as I said. We can't really target females in boxing without getting some assurance that the facilities are going to be there to meet that need. So they do need to complement each other, and one will enable the other. So they do need to work together. And I suppose at the outset, when we were forming the strategy, we were assured that these things were actually going to go hand in hand. And I mean, they are on track in terms of.
And so last question, Chair. With the new councils going in, UCS is a good opportunity now of implementing the strategy, what you've said there, facilities for girls.
I think that's still our ambition, yeah. And, you know, we've always had our eye, in developing the strategy, we've had our eye on the new boundary. And so we've been inclusive of clubs that we knew would be coming to us anyway, so that we were hatching a strategy that would kind of also target them when the time comes, which is why we've also been looking at, you know, those new clubs in those areas, and like Tullycarnet, for example, that will be brand new clubs actually. So there will be a presence in boxing in those areas that maybe wouldn't have been there before, and we've been party to enabling that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next person is Dominic Bradley.
Thank you, Chair. Morning.
Hello.
Just can I ask you, first of all, have all the clubs in the Belfast City Council area engaged with you?
We've endeavoured to engage with everybody in boxing. I wouldn't say they all have engaged with us, no.
And do you know why those who haven't engaged haven't engaged?
I think in particular, I think it would have been around the question of affiliation. And I think that was because, I mean, this is, some of what we've been doing has been working with IABA. I'm not saying that was a wholesale barrier, because what we've done is try and make sure that the funding streams, for example, are inclusive, and there's no requirement to be IABA affiliated. But there may be, I'm saying there may be perceptions around that. So we're working hard to make sure that that's not a barrier, because we're here for boxing for all of the clubs in the city. And we want maybe we need to work a bit harder to get that engagement right, and to get that understanding right. Yeah.
Just in terms of the clubs that haven't engaged with you,
Yeah.
have you been in contact with
Yeah.
them?
Yes.
So they're aware that you exist and that you can help them?
Yep. And we're looking at ways and means of how we engage better and to get a better understanding of what it is we do. Because my concern would be that there are perceptions around this that aren't actually barriers. That, you know, the way we've constructed this is to make sure that it's inclusive. And I mean, one of the recent things we were looking at was startups, and how we made sure that, you know, you didn't have to be IABA affiliated to begin with. You just needed to be a club that was performing, that was interested in boxing. Your affiliation could have been to another body, or, you know, you were sort of on the road to affiliation, but not necessarily IABA. So and our support for sport funding. I mean, you need to be established as a group. You need to have some kind of constitution, but we're not saying you're affiliated, you know, to any boxing body at that point. So it is about, you know, making sure that there's clarity and understanding of what how these things are being assessed, and make sure there's understanding.
Can I just say, when we actually did the baseline assessment from the Belfast-based clubs, we actually had a response rate of 92.6%. So, you know, we did actually have a very high response rate. So we did a lot of work at that point in terms of engaging all the clubs.
And I think that was there at the outset. The actual implementation, we've seen a bit of a fall-off in terms of total engagement. I mean, when I've said we've had 20 clubs engaged in midnight boxing or whatever, that's really a good return. But I think we still have got our work to do to make sure we're including absolutely everybody and everybody what's available to them.
Just you said that there are some problems with perceptions or indeed misperceptions. What specifically are you doing to ensure that people do not have misperceptions of what's entailed and what's on offer?
I think it is about how we engage. It is about the communication. I mean, at this juncture, I've had recent conversations with some of our own elected members about how do we get to those who aren't actually engaging with us and get a different conversation going. Because you can make so many telephone calls and send so many emails. It is about, I think, actually getting people around the table. So I think we're looking at trying to do this a bit differently, and actually getting out on the ground with clubs that haven't maybe met with us, that we've tried to get to be involved, just using different means to get them involved, and not necessarily officers, but perhaps getting elected members engaged in that process.
What was the most common need among the clubs with whom you did engage?
I think the most common facilities would be top of their list, because they are operating in some cases quite extreme environments, which limits both the numbers that they can have, but also female participation. I think then it's wherewithal, their own capacity to get access to funding, for example, to know what those avenues are. So I would say building their capacity to sustain themselves, and governance and all of that comes into that. How to run a club and get your funding right. That's the next important thing on the list.
Can I just interrupt saying that from the survey, there were some clubs that are really excellent. There's some clubs that have fabulous facilities. They are really good at getting external funding, very committed and good volunteers. So, it's not that all clubs have issues. Some are very good.
Thank you. Karen McKevitt.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Sorry for missing your presentation, but was delighted to be able to read up on it. A lot has been covered. I was going to cover the women's bit and all that, but when you talked at the beginning of that tight-knit community, and there's only one or two persons maybe, and their only interest is maybe in training up and all the mentors and all the going and they see the process from start to finish, where a child could come in through their doors with social needs, to lack of confidence, maybe they're getting bullied at school, and there's all these different things. And they're seeing the delivery of that child stepping up into a ring and maybe winning something, or even just participating in it, and they see that glory, where they forget, and the passion that's in around their delivery of helping that young lad or girl coming in through the door. Their passion does affect the way that they run their club, where they're maybe not interested in fixing the hole in the ceiling, or having the damp, or having the toilet, and all those, and the children still attend, and they see the successes that they have with basically no facilities. How are you going to encourage the like of that man or woman who's delivering the boxing to be able to come into your ring within the council and say, here's what we have to offer? Because you've said it a few times that try and encourage them in, but when there's people not there even engaging with you, within Box Club, what plans have you got to be able to try and bring them into your ring?
I mean, it has been a bit of a journey to get to where we are. I mean, the relationship with Ulster Council, Antrim Board, and clubs on the ground in the city, and there's politics between all of those layers. It is, I think, it's changing. It's changing because of the reality that we are really starting to deliver, and the relationship with clubs is changing. It is important, and I think it's a point William Humphrey made about us not just meeting with a steering group, and it's this faceless relationship with boxing. We do meet with boxing clubs, and I meet with boxing clubs on a sort of periodic basis to talk about certain things. And the sports development officer and the coaches are on the ground working, with clubs. So it is about that relationship, and then the delivery, it's building both a relationship, a confidence, and a credibility around what it is we set out to do. I think, you know, the more we do of that, the more that relationship is going to build up, you know, get built upon, and the attitude towards what we are, you know, trying to do will change. I think, you know, there's always going to be, and, you know, that kind of, not difficulty, that's too strong, but it's kind of a tension between, we are council officials, you know, we sort of hold the purse strings, and, you know, and it's clubs who are there and actually in need, and there is a process to go through. I think it's the understanding of that process, you know, because clubs can become quite frustrated with what is perceived to be red tape and all the sort of hoops that they perceive they have to jump through. But there is a growing understanding of, you know, how we make this work better for them, how we, you know, even small things like, you know, funding for events, they get 50% up front, so that they can actually get, you know, delivery going on the ground, and not expecting them to fork out all the money and then give us receipts. You know, so it's about some of the ways of working and us changing our ways of working to kind of really, really enable it and get their buy-in. And it has been a bit of a journey, and I think that's growing. That understanding's growing.
That's very welcome where clubs can get 50% funding up front, because that is one of the things we put, no matter what sport you're going to, what you're trying to deliver, the main thing is finances at the start of it and the end of it, you know. So
it is, that's a small example, but it matters in terms of getting things done.
So in your own amateur boxing strategy, it goes to 2022, but you've only funding for 3 years, which is 600,000.
Yep.
Do you see any hurdles coming at the end of 2016 that finishes at that fund? What hurdles next year do you see facing that, or is there any benefits, you know, because your strategy is going to run for another 6 years, but you only have the funding up until next year? So
well, I think we have an obvious point where we have to provide some real assessment of what have we actually delivered against what we set out to do. What are the new challenges, or where are the gaps now? What does that action plan need to focus on going forward, and what funding would be required to deliver that going forward, and we make a case for that.
So do you see then, like, the problems with facilities and, you know, that money that you have? That was my final question, Chick. The money that you have available now, that 600,000, how much of that do you think is going to be spent updating facilities, and maybe rather than what you're saying, being on the ground and trying to encourage that coaching and stuff, do you know? There's big barriers there, or do you see it been complemented with other funding? Can you reach?
Well, we haven't spent any money on facilities, and none of our money is targeted towards facilities. It's all about programming and capacity building.
But it's going to be offered as facilities is listed as the clubs by, you know, your 200,000 a year on your list. Clubs by improving facilities, it's on your list.
No, I mean,
no, it's not actual physical.
The implementation of the strategy is to assist boxing clubs by improving facilities.
But we're not actually building anything or doing anything in terms of bricks and mortar.
Right.
Okay, that really was the focus of the Sport NI funding. So everything that we're doing is about the capacity of the clubs and the programmes that they're enabling to do, which will go together with hopefully the infrastructure that's been put in place. Okay, I think going forward, I mean, I think, you know, clubs are concerned about what's happening with some of the programmes that are already, you know, in train. I mean, there's been a lot of work done in terms of understanding the facility needs. You know, where does money need to get spent to make clubs fit for purpose? There's also another stream around DSD, you know, BRO regen funding that was, you know, also, you know, potentially coming on stream to help to match fund almost. And there's a bit of uncertainty around where that funding is how is that going to come to fruition. So I think there's a number of projects in train that there's a bit of uncertainty around. You know, when council comes to consider its position in, you know, 18 months' time, you know, we will need to understand very clearly, you know, what has actually happened out of the physical facilities piece and what's left in terms of need in the city, and how does that feature, if it features, in terms of council's capital strategy, you know, which is a different funding stream.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you.
Gordon Dunn.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. Just a few points. You mentioned about some clubs that didn't engage. Is Sandy Row one of those clubs? Have you been out and spoken to them, engaged with them?
Officers have spoken to them, other officers in the council.
You haven't, though?
I haven't done personally.
Okay. Right. Just is it true to say that the unionist community don't see boxing really as being a sport that they've engaged in with historically in Belfast and outside. Would that be true? You know, we look at the list of clubs that has been provided. Even the very names of the clubs wouldn't encourage cross-community engagement.
That's
So,
not. No, that's
you
not.
know, I think there's a lot to be done to try and
I mean, it's not.
broaden
That's
it
not,
out.
that's not the sense that I have, because I have, you know, engaged with clubs in both communities, and it's not the sense that I have that it's. Well, my first sense is that it is a cross-community sport, that they do, you know, have events that span both communities, and that's part of what boxing in the city is all about. I think that, you know, we've clearly sort of stated that we want to grow boxing, and we do want to grow boxing in areas that it hasn't traditionally been in. So the East.
Why not? Why has it not been?
I think that's just the way boxing has grown in the city. I'm not really qualified to answer why it has sort of emerged as that. I think that's just the way boxing clubs, you know, have formed. I mean, and that's I suppose the baseline that we've sort of been faced with. So it's about how do we build on that, and how do we make sure that it is open to everyone. It's a sport for all, as far as we're concerned. Everything that we do is inclusive. Especially, I think, one of the bright lights for us is how schools have engaged with boxing, and that's primary, secondary, across the city. And that is creating an access to boxing that there's never been there before. So if we build on that, there is all of the opportunities there to form clubs where there never were clubs before. So it is about how we kind of join those dots together and deliver on that. You know, so the baseline is what it is. You know, it's historical in many ways. That's how those communities, I suppose, formed. But it's what we do with that.
What about those who would say that it's not a very positive thing, sport, and that, you know, you're encouraging aggression amongst young people, you know, pushing people to fight each other? There are those that would see that as not.
Have you watched a rugby scrum recently for a hurling match?
The big sticks. Well, I mean, some people may be of, you know, some people may be of that view. I think through the schools, particularly, you know, we're putting it out there as a non-contact sport, and it's very much about getting involved in healthy physical activity and getting a fitness regime. But it's as much as I mentioned before about, you know, fitness, about nutrition, about, you know, healthy living, and, you know, those kind of life skills, as opposed to, you know, being into competitive boxing. And it's about creating those kind of pathways and understanding, rather than just, you know, purely about competition. I think competition is an important aspect.
Yeah, well, there is.
It's an important strand of the boxing.
No doubt there is that aspect. There are people who have reservations about it. I think you would admit that.
Well, I have to, yeah, I mean, there may be, but also I think
they're not just maybe. There are people that have strong reservations about boxing. But yeah, there are a lot of positives, and you've put that out.
So it's about, I suppose, everything is about balance and how we serve those who want to be involved in it from a fitness and a health and well-being perspective, rather than just purely going to you know, do a competitive sport on the elite side of the sport.
Okay. The last point here is just working with Sport NI.
Go ahead.
You know, how have you found that in relation? We've been very recently been involved with them in relation to their strategy.
Yeah.
So how have you engaged with them in relation to developing your strategy?
Well, I mean, we were very involved with Sport NI. As I said, they were part of the steering group around this. And we had to be assured that we were on the same page in terms of what we were the outcomes we were trying to deliver to. They serving the physical need, the facility side of things, and us serving the capacity building and programming side. So we were, you know, we met regularly. We discussed where each were in terms of the development of the strategies, you know, at that point. And we've compared notes, you know, all along in terms of the delivery.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Awesome, Craig.
Talking about the competitive nature of things, the DCAL and Sport NI make great credence about how successful we were in the Commonwealth Games. Arguably, the only thing that we were really successful in was boxing. Has that had any impact?
I think it's really helped profile, particularly female boxing. And, you know, we need to capitalise on that, of course. because anything that kind of puts boxing into the headlines and in a positive way is what we need to sort of further enhance our engagement with local communities, schools and whatever. So I think it has helped in that it has given an extra dimension.
You think we're making enough of it? I mean, if you look at the medal take that we got, I think from memory it was like 10, of which 8 were boxing, or something of that order anyway. It just seems to me you've got what everybody else wants,
Yeah.
which is success at an international level. And I just wonder how we might make more use of that.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I think we really need to capitalise on it and make sure that boxing is seen as what it is in terms of its success. Given that our focus on boxing has been on the last couple of years, and they've been able to achieve what they've achieved, which is incredible. Huge credit to the boxing fraternity with all that they had. So, and that's down to their commitment and their passion about what they do. So, I mean, it is all about how we kind of build on that really, really strong foundation.
Yeah, I mean, I take my hat off to you about what you're trying to do, and also to the people out in the clubs, because I probably would have taken a similar view to the point that Gordon was putting forward. That I remember going to a boxing match, having dinner beside it. It was in Ballymena, watching for about 3 hours some young fellas knock hell out of each other, and I sort of like, I'm not sure this, but the more you get associated and you understand about the passion and the commitment that people have at the background, and I just think that there's something that we need to do to make people realise that it is, the king of sports, that there is something that's about it, and it's almost promoting the overall issue. I think boxing could do with some help in that. If you were to compare it with things like judo or other, or even wrestling for that matter, which are less participatory but seem to have a cleaner image. Yeah.
And it is about how we help clubs deliver on that. I mean, I think our initial focus has been on some of the basics. And once we've those basics in place, I think it is about then, how do you capitalise on all of that?
Well, if we could finish just with which a sort of hard question, which because it's the end of the session, you're at liberty to duck if you want. But there is an issue we talked about in this committee about the sort of the sectarian nature of things, and I wonder, whenever we were seeing Commonwealth success in the medals, was it your sense that there was a general, a collective, oh, that's great, boxers won medals, or did it divide on a sort of who won the medals type of basis?
My sense of it was that it was about boxing as a whole.
So you don't really think that there's a sectarian issue to it? It's just go and
I personally haven't seen it and haven't felt it.
Okay. Thank you very much, and congratulations on the good work that you...
Just make one observation on the point there that's been made by us. I think when it comes to the Commonwealth Games, that issue doesn't arise. But as we know from the report that was carried out into some difficulties, there are certain issues that are being addressed within boxing. Just a final question from William there.
Yeah, just can I have a bit of clarity on the issue that Gordon raised with Sandy Rowe? Sandy Rowe, the council has been proactive in going out,
yep.
As you said. There was no issue. I remember raising this in committee when I was on council, and then when Andrew was here as well. There is no issue at all in terms of the council's boxing strategy and money that could flow from that around affiliation.
That's right.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed. And
Thank you.
wish you well with the strategy for the council.
Thank you very much.
It's the second week the fine performance of Belfast City Council has been before this. Last week, European Office Board. Just always the Premier Council.
I think it's loaded.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Talent. Gordon. Talent, Gordon. That's
Get nothing.
Impartial as you.
totally impartial, absolutely.
No, it is.
Notice
Who's where all the phones go?
As usual.
always impartial.
Yeah, you don't...
We've got now decal and sport. What?
No, we haven't. Just got.
We haven't.
No, we have.
We have.
We collect everything.
Do it together.
It's-
Just from the point of view of actions, we'll take those maybe after we've had this presentation as well. So there'll be overlap between the two.
But nobody else should get.
That's all right.
Thanks, mate.
Now, we have with us today from Decal and from Sport NI, Fergus Devitt, the Director of Sport, Sports Museums and Regeneration, or Recreation Division, sorry, Sean Ogle, the Director of Performance at Sport NI, Tony Murphy, the Head of Sports Branch in Decal, and Willie Devlin, the Programme Manager at Sport NI. So, thanks for coming, and if you want to proceed with your presentation.
Sure, thanks very much. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today with colleagues from Sport NI to give you an update on Decal and Sport NI strategic investment into amateur boxing. Clearly, Sean and I should have checked what we were wearing before we came in front of the committee today in terms of our suits, but we didn't do that. I understand that the committee has got a briefing paper which gives you a lot of detail around the investment, and we'll get into some more around that as we go through the presentation. The Department and Sport NI were last invited to present to the committee back in November 2012 about the strategic investment and the development of the boxing investment programme as its delivery mechanism. Since then, a lot of good and proactive work has happened within boxing. Today, the committee will get an overview of what has been done for boxing so far through the boxing investment programme and the future proposals. Sean and Willie will be able to provide the detail around the programme, and we'll all be happy to take questions at the end. It was clear that the sport of boxing needed both financial investment and practical support if it was to develop and grow at a grassroots level and continue to produce local champions and role models for the sport. The Department and Sport NI recognised that there were significant challenges to the development of the sport, and these included deficiencies in governance arrangements, difficulties faced by many clubs in competing favourably for public funding and administering it effectively, and serious facility and equipment issues, including the use of temporary equipment in ageing buildings with limited or inadequate ancillary facilities. In 2011, the governing body for boxing in Ireland, the IABA, set out its 5-year strategic plan for boxing, and the Ulster Provincial Boxing Council had developed an associated implementation plan. To do this, the Ulster Provincial Boxing Council engaged with all boxing clubs to determine what was needed to develop the sport at club level, and the plans of both organisations provided the focus for the investment required within boxing. The Department and Sport NI recognised that any support provided needed to be delivered through a strategic approach and in partnership with the IABA. In taking this forward, Sport NI identified a funding package of $3.27 million within its lottery resources and worked closely with the IABA to develop the boxing investment programme. This programme reflected the priorities identified by both bodies in their plans, in particular the need for boxing equipment and boxing clubs and the capital investment required to improve club premises. Prior to the launch of the investment programme, Sport NI carried out a full equality impact assessment and published the details of the proposed programme for consultation, and this provided all interested parties with a chance to comment on the proposals. The investment programme was subsequently launched in 2013 with specific objectives to provide equipment to boxing clubs, improve boxing club premises through capital development, build capacity within clubs to ensure they can avail of funding opportunities, increase participation within boxing, including female participation, and contribute to social regeneration in deprived communities, as well as improving health and well-being in those communities. The headline programme results so far include over 90% of boxing clubs have received boxing equipment, which has been distributed through the IABA. Almost half of all boxing clubs will now receive investment through capital works to their premises. A number of these projects have already progressed to design stage, and the appointment of a club development manager who has been working closely with boxing clubs to put the necessary governance arrangements in place. We recognised right at the outset that the lottery funding of $3.27 million would not be enough to address all of the issues. faced by the sport, and that any strategic approach would also require investment from other sectors, not just Sport NI. And you've heard this morning about the investment from Belfast City Council. And in addition to that programme, the Department is also committed to providing funding of up to £1 million for boxing in Derry as part of the 2013 City of Culture Legacy. With a boxing investment programme and this additional exchequer investment, up to 45 boxing clubs will receive improvements to their premises. In seeking support and investment in the sport from other areas, Sport NI is currently working with a number of other organisations, such as DSD and district councils. This is primarily to secure partnership funding for individual projects and in some cases to help identify alternative premises. This approach complements the work being taken forward by Belfast City Council that you heard about this morning. And while Sport NI was part of the steering group that developed the City Council's boxing strategy, they have both been working together, as you have heard, to consider how shortfalls in the boxing club infrastructure within Belfast area can be addressed. Sean and Willie will be able to provide you with the details of how the investment programme has been delivered and also examples of the joint approach being taken with Belfast City Council to help boxing clubs in Belfast, for example the Holy Family Project and the Clonard Project. It's anticipated that capital works for the clubs selected so far will be completed before the end of 2015-16. And looking beyond that time, the Department and Sport NI will continue to seek funding to extend the programme and work with councils and other organisations to seek solutions for those clubs which have not been able to benefit from the current allocation of funding. I'll hand over now to Sean to provide a brief but more detailed overview of the investment programme.
Okay, Chairman, yes. I think it's fair to say that whilst the capital or the fabric of clubs is obviously very important to the clubs involved, having them at a position or at a point where they're able to yes, that fabric is incredibly important. And we've spent a lot of time building capacity with local clubs and indeed with the Ulster Boxing Council, the IABA, in terms of being able to utilise this investment. One of the things that we're often accused of is that we're all suits and bureaucrats and we make things extremely difficult for local clubs to access things. Surprise, surprise. And we have, through the appointment of a club development officer, put someone in place who acts really to lessen and reduce as far as possible any of the bureaucracy in place, whilst at the same time, of course, having an eye at all times on the public pound. That role, I think it's fair to say, has been extremely successful, and the feedback from the clubs has been very positive. So in terms of managing the expectations there, we've spent a lot of time trying to make it as smooth as possible. In fact, I suppose one description of the way we work on this is that we'd like this to be a turnkey project where the clubs have a minimum amount of effort but get the maximum amount of reward back from it. So one of the focus for us is really what happens once the fabric's improved, what happens in terms of participation, coaches they have in clubs, the way they run their clubs, how they govern their clubs, how they attract finance into their clubs, all the things which are the lifeblood of voluntary sport. We have put an enormous effort into through that post. You'll also be aware that more broadly in terms of boxing in Ireland, in the recent independent report, we've put in there an operations manager who is working to implement the recommendations that were identified within that report as well. So allied to the physical fabric of what's happening, we've put an enormous effort into ensuring that the people side of it as well complements that at every stage. We can give you details about the amount of equipment that's gone in, and Willie can talk about individual clubs as well, if you so wish. Willie, I don't know if you want to say anything about.
Yeah, just in terms of an update in terms of where we are with actual tangible investment into the clubs. Equipment in terms of boxing gloves, head guards and punch bags, which is what you've seen, the basic equipment identified by clubs in the IABA has been supplied to over 94 clubs. In some instances that was to replace existing boxing gloves, punch bags and so on. Another case then it was to meet an on-net demand within the clubs. I don't know if it's an opportune time, but we have a couple of examples with us, just to,
We'll all need one.
I don't have enough.
show
Any gloves there? I'll put the gloves on, had a few.
You don't need any gloves.
passes around, but just to show the type of equipment.
How was that about an aggressive sport? Chairman, that's for you.
No green and orange one?
Too small for you, boss.
The blue one will suit you over there.
But I think it's important to note for small investment, but any club, particularly young girls looking to boxing club, it's very important. There's good, clean, new equipment there. That's attractive to them all. In terms of the building equipment or the building works, at the minute we are working with 45 clubs across Northern Ireland. One of those clubs is actually on site at the minute, which is Monkstown, and the rest of those clubs are what we would call in the planning stage. So that ranges from either having their designs agreed with the design teams up through to entering the procurement stage in terms of getting contractors on board. So we actually have 4 what we call PQQ exercises at the minute out and about, and hopefully we will get the majority of those building works on site over this next couple of months with a view to having all capital works completed towards the end of this financial year.
That's our presentation completed. Could I suggest perhaps at some point the committee may want to consider going to Monkstown just to see that investment and how it is actually developed?
Yeah.
Still open.
We don't normally do anything if it's not Belfast.
Is it still open?
It would be nice to go to East Antrim. Yes.
Still open, is it?
It's just
Place somewhere north of Belfast, apparently.
it's to the north of North Belfast, East Antrim.
Everywhere centres.
But they draw young people from areas like Rathcoole as well.
We do.
Yeah. Just your money that you have, how many millions again? 3.27 million. And what sort of level of funding would be going then? If you take an example like Monkstown, what sort of...
In terms of the equipment, I think on average it was between £1,500 to £2,000 of equipment went into each club. In terms of the actual capital needs, that varied between clubs depending on their needs. We had 2 tranches of awards, one up to 75,000, which was for refurbishment or remodelling of existing facilities, and the second tranche was then up to 200,000, and that was really looking at major refurbishment of existing buildings, as in basically bringing them back to the shell or building new facilities. I think in terms of the Monkstown one, we can clarify this or detail this at a later stage. I think our investment in there was about 30,000.
I'm just taking that as an example of, and I'm referring back then to the City Council presentation a moment. If you take, say, Monkstown, which has a good building, this is an extension, I would assume, to what was there, if they're the £30,000.
Yes, it's actually the Monkstown project is a collaboration between ourselves and actually Newton Abbey Council. Our part of the project actually looks at refurbishment of the changing rooms there, which, as the club would say, although it is a well-known gym, but it does have its deficiencies, particularly in terms of female participation. So that was a collaborative project between ourselves and Newton Abbey Council, where we looked at the sporting facilities in terms of the changing room. Newton Abbey Council were then interested in the community impact that the facility would have in terms of after-schools clubs and a training room. But again, because we were both going on site at the same time, we put it forward as the one project.
Now, there are other clubs, and you can read the description there in the Belfast report, and they're ones you're familiar with, where we're well beyond refurbishment, even at 200,000. I'm thinking there are places, and they're not in North Belfast, they're in West Belfast, like Cairn Lodge and the Albert Foundry one, where you're operating in a derelict school with Cairn Lodge, and a place that has no running water and no toilets or anything in the case of Albert Foundry. So this is the absolute, I would have thought, the greatest need. But clearly, if you have a number like that, the 3.27 million isn't going to go far, in dealing with. How does the department and Sport NI intend to look at dealing with that? Because those are areas where and the point was made earlier, there's a greater engagement with boxing in some communities than others, and in unionist communities it's not quite to the same level. There is a differential there. So how in those areas, particularly where, I'm just thinking of that another one, I mean Midland Boxing Club again has no facilities really for females, so they're going to have to look at getting new premises. So how does the Department of Sport and I intend to do something about that?
In terms of the physical infrastructure and how we identified the works, we worked with IABA to bring on an independent survey team, and that survey team went out round in excess of 90 boxing clubs throughout all of Northern Ireland. And what their report, individual survey reports, highlighted what the priority works were within each of the clubs. So the first priority would have been health and safety, as in the fabric of the club to make sure it's actually fit and safe for somebody to enter. Thereafter, we looked at sanitation, running water, changing rooms and toilets, and thereafter we moved down into the actual boxing facilities. The award that we give then to each individual club was based on the priorities that were identified within that survey. So the likes of some of the clubs you mentioned, I think it was Clonard, Midland, their award would have been at either a higher amount, or the recommendation would have been that it wasn't value for money to invest in certain facilities. And in those instances then we are working with the clubs to try and find alternative facilities. And the likes of Midland, we've been working with the club. I think they've recently had an economic appraisal carried out through Belfast City Council. So again, we are looking at that, the outcome of that economic appraisal, as a potential project for us to invest in, rather than the current facilities.
And will there be a capital scheme then to deal with that?
We will look at those individual projects based on our budget. So our budget at the minute, we have the 3.27 million. We have a small award, a pending award there for in this instance, Midland Boxing Club, but it's never going to be enough. It's never going to be enough. So part of the work that we do, part of the work that is done through the IABA, part of that capacity building, is to look at partnership match funding from other resources, either from local councils or from the likes of BRO within Belfast.
Then the BRO money is regeneration, neighbourhood renewal money. That will transfer over to the City Council then next year.
Yeah, I think
and BRO isn't going to be taking on any projects because it'll run over into the council's term. So you're a year and more away before there'll be any decisions probably.
I think the important issue is working in partnership and trying to lever in funding from as many sources as possible, whether that is direct exchequer funding from the government, lottery funding, funding from councils, potentially even peace funding, to ensure that there's as many sources as possible. I think that would be the approach that we would want to encourage.
Okay. Thank you.
To top up the 3.27 million, there's the dedicated for boxing area. That means the 3.27 million can get spread.
So the money has gone to Londonderry, so the rest will be spread across the rest of the province. David Hilditch.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks for your presentation. The committee probably 2 or 3 years ago now, since we took an interest in what's going on in boxing. One of the main issues around that time where we started taking interest, and certainly I tried to drill down on a number of occasions, and obviously an ongoing interest, is governance. And it didn't really matter whether you were looking at the individual clubs, the Antrim Board, the Ulster Council, or indeed the governing body throughout the end. There was a lack of governance, and it needed to be picked up and get it in there to be competing with other sports. In relation, I know a lot of it, I do appreciate a lot of it was volunteers and the time and work commitments and whatnot. It is difficult, but other sports do it, but there's a massive void that we identified within boxing of governance.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. I mean, as referring to this earlier on, one of the things that we were concerned about was pumping a lot of finance into the sport and not seeing some kind of reform going on within it, which made a lot of their processes more transparent and give people the confidence, including yourselves and ourselves, that this was the right thing to do. So it's interesting, we met with the Irish Amateur Boxing Association Tuesday, And undoubtedly they have made a lot of progress in reforming a lot of their structures internally, how they operate. There's still a bit to go, as with most sports. But from that meeting, I took a fair degree of confidence that some of the appointments they've made both at board level and executive level had strengthened their organisation considerably. And indeed, you know, we pay particularly close attention to any public funding that goes into any sport, particularly boxing. Like Sean on it at the time, but I think it's in a much stronger position now.
It was so bad. At that time, I don't think there was a denial that there was even a problem with the governance. I didn't actually know what you were talking about in relation to some of the issues that come up. So it's good to hear that.
I think one of the ways we can demonstrate it is that when we met them many years ago, they shunned away from wanting to employ anybody at all to help with the development of the sport. Now they've come right round seeing the benefits of this. So they see it themselves.
Thank you. Dominic Bradley.
Thank you very much, Chair. Morning. Morning. I was just looking at the awards that you made, and there were quite a few clubs benefited from the funding, all right. I think, you know, just glancing down the list, the highest award was slightly above £3,000. So it struck me that perhaps, you know, awards such as, you know, 1,800 and so on, there's not much really a club can do with money at that, like that. It doesn't enable very much. Is there a danger that you've spread the funding too thinly and that the benefits there for the individual clubs are quite restricted and limited?
Yeah, maybe if I could just clarify the information. Whenever we sought to invest in equipment, again, to ease the administrative burden on boxing clubs, we actually procured all the equipment through the IABA in one package. So what you see there, and then it was allocated out towards individual clubs based on their membership. So the actual clubs wouldn't have been handed that grant directly. They would have gotten the value of that grant in terms of equipment. In terms of spreading out, the equipment was always seen. Again, we're working with quite a small budget, 3.27 million. I think there's a realisation from the start. I know that we're never going to be able to address all the facility requirements within boxing at that time. Although working with the IABA, it was agreed that some of the money should be diverted towards just equipment to help the clubs on a day-to-day basis. And if you talk to the clubs, they will say that the new equipment helps them on a day-to-day basis. Yes, we're now working with 45 of those clubs on a facility basis, which, you know, will look short, long, or short, medium, and long term, and that's where the vast majority of the money has gone, 3.27 million.
Into the capital side.
Into the capital side of it, yes.
Okay. That's grand. Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Karen McKellar.
Yeah, thanks very much. Dominic has touched on something I was going, but how much would a set of gloves and headgear cost a club? Do you know how many did they get? Did they get one or did they get 10? Most of the clubs here must have the same membership, because an awful lot of what was granted to them is very, very similar. Just a couple of pound in the difference. So most of them have the same membership. So how many?
They do. I think we ranked it in between different groupings. I think on average they're usually 10 pairs of gloves, 10 pairs of head guards. But then within that, technically, then they move into the competition gear. So we'd have actually bought them those types of head guards and boxing gloves. They box with those. That's participation on a day-to-day basis. Then we'd have also bought them competition head guards as well, and boxing gloves to allow then their champions as such within each club to box as well. So I think each club we're looking at 4 punch bags and then 10 sets of gloves, 10 sets of head guards for each club.
I know when we were going about and talking to different boxing clubs in the past, you know, an awful lot of the gear, I'm talking about maybe the shoes and the clothes that the competitions was borrowed, or maybe it was passed down through family members, because, you know, maybe the cousins and the uncles and the aunts had gone. Was that able to buy any of that type of gear, or was it just sorry, excuse me, the length of the headgear?
No, we did discuss that with the IABA in terms of head guards, gloves that can be used by a number of participants within the clubs. There was an issue with other parts or other bits of protective equipment and shoes that they would be seen as personal equipment, and for various reasons, hygiene reasons, they wouldn't want actually those pieces of equipment to be between boxers. So that's why it was decided just to put the head guards, the gloves and the bags.
Can I just ask out of curiosity, is there a difference between a man's glove and a lady's glove? And size, it's still the same?
No, they all go in size. Those gloves, the gloves you have there, the sparring gloves are 14. You have them 12, 14, 16 ounce. So there's absolutely no difference in them at all. Once you move then into competition, you're down into a 10-ounce glove. The rationale being, although they do look, they're actually protective gloves because there's so much padding in them, they shouldn't cut you during training. Whereas you move down into competition and they're small, harder gloves to allow them to deliver harder punches.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Right.
Cathal.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen, for your presentation there. The City of Culture funding for the 5 dairy clubs. Now, I know that the Minister committed to clubs, and sorry, I should declare that this is patron of the ABC before we start. But I know that she prepared just widening out that further. Is there an opportunity for that within that funding?
Tony, you have some details of the culture funding?
Not on the locations.
No.
Do you want me to? I'll do
Yeah,
that.
I can do it. Our budget for the minute is looking at the £1 million. Again, similar sort of model. We're able to distribute equipment to a number of clubs within the Derry City Council area. We're there and moving forward with 5 capital projects within that area as well. At present, the costings we have against those 5 capital projects would exhaust the £1 million budget that we're working towards.
So the other projects within the other currently four council areas then are not being considered at the moment through that capital funding?
No, not through that, but again, I can't say I know St Canis hasn't been given, it's actually been given an award then through the Boxing Investment Programme, and I think that's what Tony was saying before. With that £1 million going into Derry, it's allowed us to spread the £3.27 million wider.
Yeah, and just from my own, St Canis Education Trust, that's the Eglinton?
That is the Springtown project in the school up there.
So that's lovely.
They're actually the landowner.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Chair. Okay, thank you. William Humphrey.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for your presentation. Whenever we had the council in prior to yourselves, we had the Deputy Director of Parks and Leisure, and I was asking about the strategy, the DCAL strategy and the City Council strategy, and I know you've set on the City Council's strategic group in terms of taking their strategy forward. However, she did say in direct response to a question from me that there wasn't a joined upness in terms of the City Council strategy and the government strategy. Now, I must say I find that annoying, given the issues that we will all know from boxing clubs in our constituencies. I mean, Chair has mentioned I've been working with Cairn Lodge and Albert Foundry, both of them operating in very poor facilities. And I know you've provided some funding, I think, to both of them, and well, Cairn Lodge is about to get some. But how on earth can we, with all of these demands from all these boxing clubs across Northern Ireland, how can we not get a strategy agreed, in your view, the view of the Sport and I, between Belfast City Council and DCAL?
I can maybe answer that at one level, and Sean, maybe you can deal with it from a Sport NI level. I think Rose also did say that there had been close work and there was initial engagement at the start, and then what the investment from the City Council was trying to do was address specific issues, whereas the investment from Sport NI through lottery was trying to address the facilities and capital investment as well, so they were to be complementary. And my understanding certainly is that there has been working between Sport NI and the City Council on that issue to address the exact point that you make, because clearly with restricted budgets and reducing budgets, it's important that there is that complementarity.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, in the list of things that Rose mentioned in our presentation here in terms of the pathways, coach education, club support and development and governance, we work extremely closely with Belfast City Council on this, so we would advise their coaches, their officers that are in place who are actually working in boxing, so that we are very much joined up of development for example of it, or in coach development that's in there as well.
Yeah, I get that, and I asked those questions now, but she did say that it wasn't joined up in the way they would have liked. I mean, I'm happy for you to check answered. I mean, I wrote down.
Clearly, at the outset of the discussions around the steering group and how the council would work, the department was involved in those discussions. Then it was decided that at an operational level, then it would be taken forward with Sport NI sitting in the steering group rather than having the department on the steering group along with Sport NI.
But you guys, in terms of the £3 million or whatever I think it was from DCAL, you guys administered that?
Sport NI, on behalf of DCAL, it's lottery funding. It's not departmental funding.
No.
Yeah.
Yes, but you administered it.
Sport NI did, yeah.
So, you know, what concerns me is that, you know, it would have been a good example if we'd got this right, because you've got the 11 super councils coming on board now. You'll have greater resource you would hope to put into the sport, but particularly when there is a need. There are two clubs, I'm working with others again across our constituency, that they're crying out for new facilities, and they'll not be on their own. The members will talk about, I'm sure, clubs in their own areas as well. And it is, I think, just sad that it's an opportunity missed, Chairman, but I'll leave it at that.
Gordon Dodd.
Thanks, Chair. Just generally, how were clubs made aware of the funding in relation to the capital projects, and going on the number of clubs roughly that got equipment support, about 94, and there's about 70 odd applied for capital. Were there a number of clubs out there that weren't aware of what is available or weren't in a position to make submissions? Is that part of the issue?
The 3.27 million was not an open challenge process. It was directed into boxing. How the clubs were made aware of it was through direct contact from Sport NI, and we worked with the IABA and various councils to identify the affiliated boxing clubs. From there on, contact was made directly to the clubs, and again that was in recognition that traditional approaches in terms of applications, calls for applications for funding, that boxing clubs had been relatively unsuccessful using that approach. So in terms of making the clubs aware, it was direct approach to those clubs. We facilitated the clubs on a number of information evenings throughout Northern Ireland to notify them of the funding, what the funding was to be used for, and then we worked directly with the clubs through every step of the process, right from expressions of interest for the equipment through to carrying out surveys for their facilities, through to submitting those surveys in an application form for capital funding. In terms of the follow-through from surveys into actual capital awards, again, the issue there, I don't think there was one, was that a number of clubs didn't want to come forward for capital awards. They thought that the facilities that they had were in good enough state, and really the choice was left up to themselves, but all clubs would be made aware of the funding that was available.
Okay, and of the 76, about 40 are getting funding, is that right?
Yes, 45.
So a number of people disappointed, obviously, out there.
There was, yeah, obviously they were disappointed. We only had a limited budget to work with. We had to work with the clubs, as I've already talked about the surveys that we carried out to identify the clubs that there were in need. We also looked at sports development requirements as well. Unfortunately, whenever we have a limited budget, you're always going to have clubs applicants out there who are disappointed. And again, that's no reflection on the work, the effort that the individuals put into the clubs. It was mere a matter of running out of budget. We didn't reject any of the applications. All the applications are still sitting there ranked. The IABA, through their club development officer, still works with those clubs on an ongoing basis. So there's still support available from them, looking for other avenues of funding. So again, we will still work with those clubs any way we can.
Okay, just for clarification, the £1 million legacy fund in Londonderry, how was that administered then in relation to the other funding? Would some of the clubs in Londonderry been able to get both sources, or were they dealt with exclusively, or what way did it work?
No, in terms of the equipment that we sent out, yes, some of the clubs would have availed of both. The reason being...
Would have?
Yes, they would have. The reason being, I think in response to an earlier question, 10 sets of gloves or 10 sets of headguard is not going to meet the need within any particular one club. There was still identifiable need within those clubs whenever we give them equipment. In terms of the capital works, the clubs within the Derry City Council area would have already had their survey carried out as part of the independent survey that's carried out amongst all the clubs. So whenever the additional money became available, those clubs already had a survey carried out. They already had identified project in place, and some of them would have had an indicative award from the lottery monies. So whenever the £1 million became available, we redirected that towards the Derry clubs and then redistributed the lottery clubs towards other clubs throughout Northern Ireland.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Just a couple of points to finish off with. The equipment there, you said, was administered through the IABA. Did they, then, did you have to be a member of the IABA to avail of it? And B, did they have a single supplier that then it was done as a single contract and farmed out to the various clubs?
Yeah, in the first point, whenever we published the eligibility criteria for the project, it was a membership of an internationally recognised governing body, so we didn't at that stage limit it to the IABA. Okay. Secondly, there was a procurement exercise carried out through CPD that was facilitated by ourselves and with the IABA. I think there was 4 suppliers identified who provided a range of gloves, headguards, punch bags.
Okay, secondly, on page 4 of the paper we got from the department there, paragraph 15, gives Sport and I are working with DSD, district councils, other bodies across a range of clubs, partnerships, and so on. A few examples include working in partnership with Belfast City Council, who act as a design team, and it mentions there Holy Family, Clonard, and Ardoyne. Would Midland and Cairn Lodge also come into that category?
Yes, at the minute, yeah. We were working with, actually we had a meeting regarding Albert Foundry yesterday in terms of their project, and also Midland as well. As I said, in terms of Midland, we had looked initially at a smaller award to their existing facility, sure, in terms of their changing rooms in particular. I know then Mr McKee then had worked in terms of developing up a larger economic appraisal.
I was just surprised when the council was working with clubs right across the community. The only 3 that were mentioned there were Holy Family, Clonard and Ardoyne. There was no mention of Cairn Lodge or Midland. And it just, whoever wrote the paper, I don't know who wrote it, just seemed odd they were left out.
Well, again, in terms of those 3 clubs, I don't think there was any reason why others would have been left out. It may be the case that we give those 3 examples because actually the council are offering design team services to those clubs in addition to partnership funding.
What does it mean when they're getting design team? Is that beyond the economic appraisal stage?
Not for Midland, but it could be, to give you an example of Holy Family, where the council actually own the facility the Holy Family are in. So rather than us need to employ an extra design team, we can use the council's internal design team.
Right. Where is Holy Family? Is that the one? Is that New England? No.
No, Holy Family is Paddy Barnes's club. Right. It's just about a mile down from Tigers Bay, you know, just in the crossroads at the bottom of Dunkern Gardens.
That's Newington.
Or maybe that's the area. Sorry, I wasn't familiar.
I didn't know the
area.
council owned that. Right. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Okay. Well, I think that's all. No more questions. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh. Karen was going to take those home. Now. You were going to take the gloves home, I thought.
Was it?
Well, you were asking that many questions about them.
All right, Chair. Are you trying to silence me?
No, I was just fussed. I was just impressed by your interest in boxing gloves.
I have a great interest in boxing.
Now, Dominic.
I hope he wasn't referring to that Irish film that's out, either.
Possibly comment on that.
Move on quickly at that point.
Please do.
Yeah. We've heard the presentation then in regard to the City Council and the other department and Sport NI. Are there any particular actions members want to take at this point, or are we content to note that and keep a monitoring role on it?
Well, the only thing, Chairman, I have to say is I am dismayed. I mean, I remember sitting in this committee and sitting in the Parks Committee, trying to make sure that there would be a joined upness. We all have boxing clubs, said it when they were in our constituencies, you could do with more. And one of the ways you do that, when you've got a small amount of money with a huge demand that there is going to be, is to make sure there's a joined upness to try and maximise the bang that when it goes out there. And from what Rose said, I'm not sure that happened. And that annoys me, because there will be opportunities missed. There will be clubs that won't have got funding, and they were never going to be able to meet the demand that was there anyway, because the budgets are limited and the demand is huge. But that annoys me. You know, we go on and on and on about making sure there's a meshing of the government departments and councils.
The other thing that struck me, I meant to ask it to the department, forgot in the end, was there's clearly a need that is far in excess of what is available. Has the department bid for additional capital monies for boxing clubs? Because if you even put a figure of £500,000 on a brand new boxing club in a particular area where the current building is simply fit to be knocked down, you're not going to meet the need across Northern Ireland. I'm only conscious of the need in my own constituency and the adjacent one, but I assume that the need will be right across the province. So could we actually ask the department, have they been bidding for capital money for boxing? Maybe they have and haven't.
Absolutely, Chair. I think there have been bids within different projects, and as members have already heard before, there's the different money for the legacy in the North West. Are you advocating that the department bids in future?
No, just asking, have they in past rounds been?
I also asked for information to see as a promotion in and around shared spaces, how many have to avail of shared space for boxing. I know that they talked in their presentation about a portable ring. She said Belfast City Council had one or two. You know, if the shared spaces there to be used and there's portable rings about, you know, their balance there. Where did that go within the consultation and stuff?
I think portable rings are fine for certain things, but you need the strength of a building for hanging up all the bags and so on, all the stuff for training. Yeah. That's
Is our schools open to boxing clubs, anything like that, when they have, most of them have gyms, or quite a lot of them have gyms, you know?
Sure, there was mention of that from the Belfast City Council through the Education and Library Boards. That was more identifying potential boxers and signposting to clubs, but it seemed to be clear that the schools were being involved, at least with the fitness side of things, and so on, that there was signposting to clubs. I don't know whether there was actually use of school facilities for boxing. That may be separate.
Can I ask? Okay, thank you. That moves us on then to matters arising. And if members would look to the correspondence tracker, which is found in your table papers.
Chair, it bounced out of the pack again.
There, table papers, outstanding correspondence, we're down to one.
Yes.
Oh, it's only due from September from our PFP. Move on quickly. Page 85. The breakdown of funds allocated to councils through the community festivals. There's some information there. There's a detailed report that there on page 85 then, the response. Members will find a detailed report at page 87. In terms of the different councils, how funding was allocated from 2008-9 to 2010-11. And members may find the summary information at page 153, 154 under conclusions and recommendations useful as well. Anyone wants to comment on that? Gives you an indication there of the amount per council. Okay, members content with that? Okay. The evaluation reports for 11, 12 and 12, 13 can be found in the members' table papers. Tables showing the breakdown of funding per council area can be found at page 6 for 11, 12 and page 12 for 12, 13. Information from festival organisers is still being gathered for 2013-14. The Minister clarifies that when the Community Festivals Fund was managed by the Events Company, councils did not get direct funding, but festival organisers applied for grants, and therefore it's not possible to break down this funding by council area. The Minister also indicates there is no information available while this fund was managed under the NIO due to retention and disposal policies. So, going back to the origins of festival funding in those early days when there was a significant issue, it all seems to have been shredded.
Yeah.
Funny that, yes. So I think some questions were asked at the time by members of the Westminster, by members of the House of Commons and the Lords, and I think some of them may have some of that information still in their possession.
So, how long ago are we talking about?
Under direct rule.
Yeah, no, but I mean, how then do you? Where does the 30-year rule come in for papers?
Chair.
Who gives people authority to shred papers?
It's the difference in kinds of papers. There are requirements around financial papers, requirements around applications, and then requirements around policy documents. I think in terms of what they're saying there about the NIO, that might have been around applications that then they would actually have for analysis. I suspect the applications themselves, there's a finite period of time that those are kept, and there may be rules around being allowed to keep them beyond a finite period of time. I think it's around 7 years.
7 years.
Some cases are 9 for special reasons. The 20 and 30-year rules apply to different kinds of papers where it's, if I get this right, where it's policy communication, and that tends to be retention at quite a high level.
Yeah. So the applications would be destroyed. In business, you're required to keep files for 7 years. So what you're talking about there, I have no difficulty with that. But the policy papers around the actual funding wouldn't have been shredded, couldn't have been shredded in that context.
In some cases, it might have been the back of an envelope.
Indeed, yes, because it probably weren't there.
What was and what wasn't? Things. No, we don't.
It's one of those Sir Humphrey things that.
There is no information available while this fund was managed under NIO due to retention and disposal policies. Now, I can understand that the actual application form from Group X or Y may have been destroyed. But surely somewhere or other in the financial systems it will give a record of there was a cheque for £50 or £100,000 paid out to Y or whoever. that sort of information.
Just, Chair, I honestly don't know that level of detail in terms of record retention. I'm not sure.
I think we should ask those questions. Yeah. No difficulty with the application thing. You know, I get that. The number of applications going in that they couldn't bother. But in terms of the papers around the policy and political direction and that sort of thing should not have been destroyed.
It might also be helpful if...
Could not have been destroyed.
Yes. It would also be useful to go back and look at the answers that were given in response to written questions and oral questions from both Lords and Commons in Hansard, because it was NIO, so it was all dealt with at Westminster. Yes, Dominic?
Yeah. Chair, I know that from time to time a schedule comes from the Department of Papers which they intend to dispose of. I think the last time we had one was about 2 years ago.
Possibly, yeah.
And usually committee members get a chance to examine it and to raise questions about whether or not certain items should be retained or disposed of. I don't know, it's probably a cyclical thing every 5 years.
It would be useful then, could we actually then, and it shouldn't be too difficult with the internet and you can search these things quickly enough, just look back for answers, questions and answers in that era on festival funding. You just compile those.
Chair, can we pin down, are we talking, what particular year group are we talking?
I asked where this was going.
I think it's to try and get this picture of here's how it was done under the Events Company, here's how it was done under the Community Festivals Fund, but you never started with a level playing field because there were... Sorry?
No, go ahead, sorry.
So it's to get back beyond that to see how the process, how festivals have evolved over the period.
Well, that's more a research thing, more than back to see if records are destroyed, etc., etc. You know, if that's all you're going back that on information like that, that's more research. And I think we need to be looking at what we have here on developing the Festivals Fund ourselves to take it forward rather than going back. Because are we saying that back there was something better? That's what research.
No, I think it's just to get so that people have.
That's what research is all about.
Oh yes, research about a whole lot of things.
That's really what we're talking about. Research, finding out who's destroying records. That seems more like a James Bond thing.
It's not who destroyed the records; it's what records still remain. William,
it's just I listened to members a few weeks ago where this was being discussed, and there was concern in some areas where members were making the point. I think that some councils didn't have the money to provide the match funding, so the money was going back, and there was a particular announcement with some members, if I remember rightly, that Belfast was getting more money because it did provide the match funding and could do. I think it's an important piece of work to do because you've now got the economies of scale coming in with the new councils, and if there was a disparity, we didn't start off in the right place. The previous system under direct rule and the system that Edwin Pooch, I think, brought in whenever he was at DCAL, which is the system we currently have. And we need to, you know, as we go forward, need to find out if what is the best one, so that we can get, a share, a level of playing field created across the councils, across the communities, across the country.
Chair, can I suggest we get Dan to see what he can put together in this? We can give him all the information we've discussed, and he can do, because he knows people he can ask.
And Chair, I think if we're going down that line, then we have to see how the new council's policies on how they're funding their festivals and community funds now are going to be in situ. Because some of the councils that the member has spoken of who couldn't possibly match fund that's the money that was handed back, well, maybe they have a new policy. Bigger councils now can afford to do that. And I think maybe those councils who couldn't afford it before will be able to pick up on that. And when you look through the report of some of the councils there is grounds for that there. So we need to find out from the 11 councils their policies now and how much they're going to put into the pot.
Are they at the stage of, I'm not au fait with how the super councils are moving on. Are they at the stage of developing their policies on that?
Most councils are doing that. Nearly all councils are doing that anyway. They're doing that.
My issue, Chairman, is not with...
Sorry, just wait.
Indeed, your own minister there announced there last week you will be putting together a tourism growth fund. All councils will have to look at that now of putting money into their pot to be able to apply to the growth fund. So I think we need to give these councils time to get their policies put together.
Right, there's a piece of correspondence there for further on from the Culture Minister. Thank you for your correspondence of 2nd of February regarding the need going forward for work with the councils to ensure a joined-up approach.
Page 176 in the pack, sorry.
Local councils will be responsible for bringing together a range of community partners. As part of the planning process, my department intends to liaise fully with the new councils in relation to CFF and the wider cultural and creative remit. So clearly, the
department's on the case.
The Minister will intend to work with councils on that.
Yeah.
There was a question, Chair, around the definition of the community funding as well.
Chair, we also have that as well.
We'll come to them different.
Yeah, have to go to the issue.
My point is, though, that we need to have a clear policy from the department. Councils will have their own views, and we can't, nor can the department make councils change their opinion or their view as a matter for the councillors. But my point is the policy, if the policy isn't right, then the councils may not be in a position to take it up. So we need to make sure that the policy, whether it was the policy under direct rule or whether it's the policy that's there, some people have criticised in this committee. So what's the issue of looking to find out exactly what is the best policy going forward to ensure the equity we talked about earlier?
Well, it's been suggested there by Peter that he'll speak to Dan about getting a piece of work done there, because that's what Dan does, research. Secondly, some of these issues are dealt with later on in correspondence a bit further on, and we'll come to that in a moment. Members content with that? Okay. Moving on down this here then, members will find the definition of a community festival used by the majority of councils at the end of the Minister's letter on page 86. And go to page 86 there just to get the definition of what a community festival is. If members have read that and are content with that. It defines it very much in terms of a defined time period. There can't be a weekly programme over a year.
Sorry, Chair, what page is that?
86.
86 of the pack.
There's got to be a community focus, a defined time period, by creating a sense of identity and importantly contribute to social well-being, initiated and run by a community organisation or a community-led partnership. It is not enough to run a festival for a community, so you can't have larger professional organisations coming in and having the money handed over to them to do it for the community. It has to be community-led, and the community himself must play a strong part in that. So, members content with that? Or do they wish to comment on that definition? It's clearly the one that the Minister has drawn up. Okay, everyone content?
Yeah, except I would just make the point, if you look at the last paragraph, by no means are all councils bought into the process, and so indeed some of those councils might be part of, potentially could be part of new councils, super councils.
Okay, just if we look at all councils with the exception of those use that definition.
Where's Annex B?
Annex B is
Annex B is at 173.
page 173 in your pack.
Running ahead to 173. Right, got it now. Yes.
Yes.
Now, I think the point then that William's raising there is that's how it has been up to now. Councils have had their own definitions. Just looking at them quickly, they seem to be variations on a theme. The core elements seem to be much the same. Yes.
If we remember from the last briefing,
Alter, right, okay.
Was a flexibility.
Right,
but it's the same points.
And moving forward, if that's the definition, will the position again be that councils can tweak it to suit themselves?
Clarity on that.
It still had to be agreed by the department.
Okay, they have the flexibility to tweak it, but it has to be okay by the department.
But it hits the main
right, that's
things that you've outlined.
Yes.
In each of the councils, there's a known as a governance committee, and I would think this would be something that would be brought up at a government's department within councils, and they're like Newry Moran and Down, which are sort of the pilot of it, and working together the past 12 months. I'm not sure whether Down Council would have the same termination as Newry and Moran, but that's up to the new councils to decide on those, not our committee.
No, I think all that was asked for was people were asking for information about what is the definition. I think that a number of people had raised that at the previous meeting.
Actually, what we have.
I get a sense from where dancing around. So if there's an issue,
I have no interest in what council's policies are or aren't. That's the policy from the department I'm talking about.
That is theirs, but it's a guidance framework, policy and guidance framework. But within that, you can tweak it to suit yourself. So if members are content to leave the issue, then fine. Okay. Right, brings us on then to page 176 from the Minister on the link. That's that one. Right, next one is fully page 178 then. We've moved on from festivals, we're now moving on to Casement Park. And we've got the correspondence there from in regard to that. Are there any questions in regard to that? They've confirmed that the final seating capacity of Casement Park and the total legal costs associated with the judicial review will be forwarded to the committee as soon as the information is available. Members have requested an update on these issues at the committee meeting on the 12th of March. We'll hear a report on that.
Yes, we've scheduled a further briefing from the committee, from the departmental team on that, so that's already in the forward work programme. So if we come back to that, then we have all the figures in place.
Right. Brings us on then to page 181 regarding Carrickfergus Cricket Club. The Minister has indicated she is aware of the successes of the club and will invite them to attend the celebration of Sporting Success 2014 event in the surroundings of Newry Sports Centre on Wednesday the 25th of March of this year.
Darren Edwards, Chair, as Vice President of the particular club.
Congratulations. The Minister has also highlighted that a formal invitation to this event will be forwarded to members of the committee in due course, and are members content to note. Okay. Then we come to page 183, and that was in relation to Ultram funding. Ultram was previously funded through Forest and Gaelic. However, due to a recent change to their funding model, the newly funded cross-border body for Irish medium education, CNG, wrote to the Department of Education to highlight the potential impact on Irish preschool education from July 2014. The Department of Education provided stopgap funding of $98,000 to allow this education to continue until the 31st of March. CNG have written to DE asking them to consider supporting services in the longer term. I'm not sure that it's altogether clear that there's not some element of double funding. I can't work out why CNG can't deliver this in Northern Ireland. If they're operating across the whole of the island, and they're presumed, do they do that in the Republic?
I think they're more at they run the education stream, what Altram does is preschool Irish medium.
Who does that in the Republic then?
I'm assuming Synergy.
There's a new group, I think, set up under the new funding model to do it, or
Probably don't do it at all.
sponsorship for it.
And Synergy's the lead body.
Are they not doing it now, this new group?
Yeah, but I think one of the problems is that they possibly don't have the skills or expertise or knowledge of the various systems in place in Northern Ireland. And Altram obviously haven't built up a bank of experience over a long period of time.
But if you've been given the contract to do something across the island and you can't do it, that raises a question about how Forrest and Gaeilge selected this body, whatever they are, to do it.
Well,
they got the contract to do something and now they can't do it. And so they've been given money out of Forrest and Gaeilge to do something across the island, but they can't do it, so somebody else is going to get funded to do it in a different way. That's double funding.
As you know, I was largely opposed to the new funding model, or at least the outworkings of it here in this jurisdiction. I think I expressed that quite clearly at a number of meetings of this committee and outside of it. So I wouldn't be in a position to defend the outworking of the new model.
So, this is just baffling.
Chair, might it be helpful to write to Forrest and Gaeilge to ask for their perspective and clarification on this, how the provision differs now and where the shortfall is, and how DE fits into the equation in terms of picking up the funding for Altram and what existed before?
When you read the letter there, it says, given the potential uncertainty around the Gael Scoilana TO recruitment process for early years specialists in the north, the priority attached to ensuring quality in that and the requirement for that. So they're in the process of recruiting. I can understand that. So they haven't quite got there yet.
Yeah. That's the body there, according to Gael Scoilana. Sorry.
They're the lead organisation.
Gael Scoilana, isn't it?
Yeah,
something TO.
Well,
Gael Scoilana Joe. That it translates as Irish Medium Limited.
Oh, TO's Limited, right? Okay,
yeah,
right.
They have the contract for delivering it. As far as I understand, they're not yet, because of the issues I mentioned earlier on, their unfamiliarity with the system here and so forth, so on and so forth. They haven't people sufficiently trained up to take on the role immediately.
Well, what's interesting is that Synergy has recently submitted strategic proposals for DE for support services for the Irish medium preschool sector. So, the Irish Medium Limited has been funded to do something by Forrest, but suddenly now there's a bid being made by, and I don't know what the relationship is between them and Synergy. It's now looking for money from DE to pay for this. It's not even funded from this. It's worse than an episode of Coronation Street. I don't understand it. I just find the whole thing baffling. We need to write to somebody,
yes,
get an explanation.
If we write to Forrest and seek clarification on how the system works and what went before, if the committee is agreeable to that, we'll write to Forrest and establish just exactly how the system works and how it is transitioned from the previous funding model.
There are at least two bodies, if not more, working across purposes within the sector.
Chair, if I remind members of the context of the new funding model, part of the issue with groups like Altram was they wanted to be part of a confederated offer, whereas the way that the new funding model proceeded was that bodies had to be a merged body. Altram was not for the idea of merging with other bodies. They wanted to retain their particular structure and so on. They made representation to the committee. which is one of the reasons why they didn't get the position as one of the lead organisations, because they couldn't fulfil the function on both sides of the border, and they weren't willing to merge with another organisation to go forward on that. I think that's my recollection, Chair. I need to go back to the papers to be exact
and it finishes
on that.
on the financial, the 31st of March.
There's a line here.
Maybe there's a crossover with applying for fund the department because of. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I think that's the clarification that is required from Forrest, how that works.
So, money that was going out from Forrest together and here, essentially you're putting more money into the sector from DE, which frees up money from Forrest together to spend on other things.
Chair, I'm just not sure that's why we need to clarify.
We need
how
to
that
get
works.
some, yes, get an explanation.
It depends on whether or not the funding has been supplied to Gaelscoil and the
Yes,
yeah.
We don't know that.
No.
They don't tell us.
So that's, Chair, what we can clarify from.
It'll need to be, I think, a very, very specific letter, because the letters you're getting back on this are so vague. It's impossible to understand them. We'll get a letter.
We will draw together all those elements, Chair, and we will proceed with a letter to Forrest.
The problem with that is too, these things then run on from one meeting to the next, and you lose track of who's the will to live nearly with some of them. They do take a long time to get through. Okay.
Does 187, page 187, add anything to it?
That's the next one we're just about to deal with.
No, I don't think so. It doesn't. It's not specific enough. It's quite general, high-level stuff, really. Yeah. Then, okay, brings us then on to 187, the one letter just referred to, which was regarding funding for Forrest and Gaeilge and the Ulster Scots Agency. And we have the breakdown of the Northern Ireland input there as well into that. In percentage terms and hard terms as well. 75% in one case, 25% in the other, and DCAL is putting then 2 point as a total budget. Agency's total budget was 2475, of which DCAL contribution was 75%. Members content to note that?
Great.
Okay. Brings us on then to I'm just taking an error, just a note here. The amount that DCAL then puts in each year into the Ulster Scots Agency was 1.84 million and 3.1 million into Forrest and Gaeilge. It's actually a disparity there of not quite 2 to 1, but ain't far short of it. Brings us on then to page 189, training for stewards and IFA matches. The correspondence highlighted that the final training session was held on 15th of February, and members were forwarded this information after the meeting last Thursday. Content to note.
Right. That was on that course?
Yes, yes. Oh, you're happy?
That's
Right.
great.
Right.
Good course.
Page 19 there, European Priorities Option Paper, which is at page 19 in your table papers. Following the committee's discussion last week on possible EU priorities that the committee want to take forward in relation to arts, culture and leisure, the clerk has provided an options paper for members to consider, including a draft paper to OFM DFM found at page 17. It's been put into this week's table papers with the intention that you would have time to read and inwardly digest, and we'll discuss it at next week's meeting.
Chair, just so I can fly up, it follows a format that this is the third year of the format where the OFM DFM committee writes out to individual committees asking them for their EU priorities and an assessment of what has gone in the past. So this is the latest update for 2015, and it makes some reference to 2013 and 2014 previously. This is the first of those 3 years that we actually have CAL-related Commission work programme priorities coming from the EU Commission. So we have those, and then we have additional priorities that the committee has ongoing. So we bring those back next week for discussion by members and approval of the letter.
Can't wait.
Right. Also on page 16 of the table papers, correspondence regarding Interreg funding. The Assembly European Affairs Officer has highlighted Interreg streams which Council successfully applied for funding, and examples: Causeway Coast and Glens Heritage Trust. Craigavon Borough Council have been successful in securing funding for Cal-related activities, and a joint application between Causeway Coast and Glens and Fermanagh was successful for tourism funding. So some councils are doing things in that regard. Terms of accessing European money.
Karen Anders is a former director of Causeway Coast Glens Heritage Council.
Oh, you carry an interest?
Yes, absolutely.
Former director of the same organisation and also the Causeway Glens RTP.
But likewise.
Okay, we've got those. Yes. Yes.
Ribbons.
Thanks for that, Colin.
Well done. Page 192 in the correspondence is the OFM DFM committee correspondence regarding the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. The OFM DFM committee has responsibility for the committee stage of the Children's Services Cooperation Bill, and the committee is writing to all statutory committees seeking their views on the clauses of the bill. They are asking for a decision by Friday the 6th of March. Members are asked to bring any comments they have to next week's meeting, when the bill will be brought back to the committee. You also have in your table papers EU Matters newsletter from the Assembly EU Affairs Manager. And then that brings us on to, the members are happy to note that. Chairperson's business. There's an invitation at page 207 from the University of Ulster and Barnardo's to a languages event. The event is at 6 o'clock Wednesday the 11th of March in the Ulster University's Belfast campus. Please let the committee of us know if you plan to attend. There's also an invitation at page 24 of the table papers from the Minister to attend the LIFA Book Club launch, which is being held on Wednesday the 4th of March 2015 at 7 o'clock in the Vaughan Gallery. Invitation was sent to the committee on Monday. Members should note the event clashes with the committee's visit to the North West, so we'll not be there. But members are asked to note that as the next development in LIFA. Is that one of these things running forward into the new financial year?
Chair, I'm not honestly sure. We don't have details on the launch, so I don't know if it's a book club in the sense that I've been in a book club. I guess it's going to last for a while. I'm honestly just not sure. I don't have details, but once the launch is done, we can ascertain that.
Readings from Treasure Island and the Boys in Striped Pyjamas. So it's a book club.
But is this something that involves funding from the department or something?
It's a departmental invitation, but that's...
There's no further
already £625,000 additional to the figures we were sent to us here today. It makes the disparity even bigger.
Yes. And we're still waiting to hear from back from the Scots about all that issue about spending on Irish Scots. I think some departments are very tardy in opening up their figures. Be useful maybe to get some information about the book club initiative. Has there been a business case for this? Is there a financial investment? What is it?
Chair, we can write to the department if members are agreeable to ask for a business case, and that should give us costings and so on. We've done that before in various elements of LIFA, so if the committee agrees to that, we can write to the Minister.
Great.
Great,
that's fine. Next item then is the Clerk's memo found in table papers to mark regarding the outline proposal to mark International Dance Day. Find that.
It's a hard copy just today.
It's a hard copy. It's on the
actual table.
On the table.
Yeah.
Oh yes, there it is. Sorry.
Look for one that looks like a memo with a table at the bottom of the first page, Chair.
And this is about the price of the sandwiches.
Is this the Chairman's initiative?
Yes, Chair.
Is he leading off?
Sorry?
Are you leading off?
I don't think so. Somehow.
Chair, if I can just give members a bit of context as well. International Dance Days at the end of April, and there was a proposal that the committee would organise an event. Members may be aware that City Dance took place across Belfast in a number of venues, and that was. It hasn't happened yet?
No, it's Friday, Monday.
Friday. Through over the weekend, so I thought it had happened last weekend. And it's at a number of different venues, and we've contacted them in terms of the availability of. They have international groups and so on that they can access, and the basis of the estimate is on the cost to the committee only being the provision of a light finger buffet lunch. We've made it very clear to them there would be no other cost that we can offer them, so we wouldn't be offering transport or anything like that. So essentially, the costing members have got is for a light buffet lunch for the dancers and obviously members who attend that, and we have it for 30, 40 and 50 people. So essentially what we're looking at from the committee, 20, 30 and 40 people, but we can extend that if members want, is agreement from the committee on what numbers they want to cap that on. That was the request that was to us, was to bring that. So if members want to go ahead with the event and there's agreement by the committee on that, then it's a case of if members want to give us an indication of the size of group they want to cap the cost.
Chair, where's it been held? Because
Chair,
Great Halls have not been asked for.
Chair, once we get agreement whether or not members want to go ahead, we'll approach Speaker's office to ask for the Great Hall. But we didn't want to do it until there was actually agreement to go ahead with an event.
Check provisionally, and there's nothing there that would preclude it. So it's.
You can either do them in the Long Gallery, these things, or else you do them down the Great Hall. But if you do it in the Great Hall, people tend to go over to the.
We might struggle to get a Long Gallery booking at this stage.
And people just come out of rooms and when they hear the noise and the music and all that.
How do you propose to have the music? Are we going to get like a wee
band?
We're looking to.
I had spoken to them, and because they're going to do like a 15-20 minute performance, they would have their own music that they would move it together. So they would provide that with them.
The dancers provide their own music.
Set performance.
And who are these people?
They are City Dance, so they are workshops of people from across, well, from Northern Ireland, but mainly based, I think, in Belfast, who are doing world
Have to be from Belfast, do they?
No, they don't have to be. They can be from
Considering,
around
Chair,
the world,
we're not
that's fine.
providing transport costs to
but
keep the event.
Do they include what you would term cultural traditions, local cultural traditions?
I asked them to look at cultural dance from around the world, including local traditions. So that would be possible.
Highland dancing, country dancing and Irish dancing.
Again, because we haven't confirmed with them, they're away to see if there's availability from people, performers actually on that day. It is a Tuesday during the day, so it's whether people are available if they're in school or at work. But yes, they said that they'll look into that. So.
It'd be good to get good practitioners of those, so you get the best.
Chair, as Maria has flagged up, it's all down to availability. This is during a working day.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah.
That would be very nice to have it.
Thank you.
So, Chair, what we're looking for is members' agreement to go ahead with the event. And then if they want to set a cap on how many
I
are.
will if forced to,
Dominic,
I will too, Gordon.
Oh no, please, we just leave it balanced.
I don't know what that meant.
You can't have two left feet.
I could do
Dominic can say.
Chair, do we have agreement on moving ahead with the event?
Great.
We're happy enough with the price of the sandwiches.
I just hope there's the level of scrutiny to more significant budgetary issues.
I think that's a very well-made point, because the amount of time that was spent there sorting out about over the last week, or last week's meeting, about a couple of £100, and it seems hundreds of thousands can just be doled out very easily. Yeah. Oh, well,
Chair, can I just take the opportunity to thank Maria for doing the research on this? Her events office background has been extremely useful.
Chairman, sorry, the participants then will be arranged.
Line dance at this, will there be?
We're limited to what City Dance can help us with. Chair, we will talk to City Dance.
Yeah.
Can I stress that people would be coming for free, so we are in their hands as to just exactly what we can provide. I don't think we can be too prescriptive, because these people are doing this for nothing.
Oh, I'm sure there's line dancers. For now. I'm only joking. We're moving on.
Fathers Club, but you might not
Right.
see that.
Did you get one?
Final items then are forward work programme page 211. And Clark, if you'd just speak to that.
Chair, I'm just flagging up the same again. We are looking at a visit only to Brain Injury Matters next week after the committee meeting. I'll provide details to members of that. They have a very finite time period. They can see us when they actually have people at the premises that we can talk to. So I'm provisionally looking at a visit sort of 1:30 to 3. So I'll put out details of that to members. That will be next week after the committee meeting, 1:30 to about 3, and it's top of the Craiger Road. Castlereagh Road, sorry, Brain Injury Matters. So I'll put out details to members about that, and it's a case of whether members are able to come. All right, but you're able to go, Chair. You've already indicated you can go. So it will at least be the Chair and myself, and we can bring back information. The other one was just reminding members again, I think we've now had responses from everybody about the North West visit, so we'll now be able to put an itinerary together for next week's meeting, and we are providing a bus. So members can travel up on the bus, we'll have the bus while we're there and then coming back again, so members can leave their car here.
Okay.
Chair, thank you.
Brings us on then to, unless there's any other business, nothing's been noted.
We've not been notified of anything, Chair, if there's anything else.
So next meeting is next Thursday, usual time here. And
is there any other AOB? No. Okay.
Meeting will begin in closed session to allow members to consider BBC charter renewal, EU priorities and decal budget. The committee will be briefed by Libraries NI regarding their savings delivery plan and library opening hours. And any complaints about opening hours can be put next week to Harry Knox.
Chair, can I just flag up on that one? There's a lot in the media about this at the minute. They've also put out a consultation paper that we will have in members' packs. Just to remind members that the agreement of the limited reduction to the Libraries NI budget was contingent on libraries remaining open. Unfortunately, they're going to have reduced opening hours, but as far as we are aware, no libraries will have to close. But it's an opportunity for Irene Knox, the Chief Executive, to talk to members about how that's going to work and how it might be possible to lever in other people to possibly extend the opening hours.
Chair, I just had a look at the consultation document yesterday, and there's some libraries that there are substantial closures in terms of hours, upwards in 12 and 8, 10, 12 hours. So it is substantial in some areas.
I got thrown out of the newspaper library last night at 5:30. Central Library. That's why I'm going to complain, which is here next week.
Chair, I know I spoke to.
No, there were two other people, both from North Belfast.
Chair, I know I spoke to Irene Knox this morning, and Libraries NI are very keen to come and talk about ways they see as moving forward to try and expanding those hours. Members will recall that temporary staff have already gone with in-year cuts. They're going to be up first so that we go into the closed session after, so they'll be here for 10, just so members are aware of that.
Okay. That's our business completed, so meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.